Hi, in this video I wanted to talk about asserts, and the reason for that is because I don't see many people use them and I think they're really useful. So I have some of my own utilities that I'm gonna present to you, and also in the description I'm gonna leave the link to GitHub so you can download them if you want to test them out. But I have three types of asserts that I like to use in my projects, and I'm not using them just like experimental, I'm actually using them in production, basically when I work on clients' projects. So some of them I find more useful than others, but generally decently useful, so I wanted to share them with you. So before we start, let's go over what are asserts. So asserts basically mean you're trying to confirm that some value is the value that you actually want, or some value is something that you are expecting, if that makes sense. That is the general idea of asserts. And I have three types of asserts that I like to use. And these design markers are not actual asserts, but something generally similar. It's more for like testing paths and stuff like that, but yeah, we are gonna go into that. But we have three types. So normal asserts, then we have design markers and net asserts, which I think are kind of unique, but I actually find them most useful of all. So we're gonna cover that also. Okay, so let's go first through normal asserts. If I go to player controller, and let's say when I jump I want to check something. So what I can do is type assert, and I have few types. So I have array asserts, normal asserts, which is just like a value, and then we have set assert. If I do a normal assert, we get something like this, which is you have a wildcard and you need to basically plug something in and then you can compare it to something else. And good thing about macros, so how this is developed, is that you get the compare to value, we have to make it in arrays. Macros allows us to use wildcards, which is basically undefined value, so you can define it as you use it. But there is an issue how it works, that you cannot just compare them directly. So you have to make it an array, then find it, then get it from the array and then compare it basically. So it's a little bit finicky, not the best, but I found this way to work fine. And how I usually like to get my errors is we have our print string, we have an error which basically is gonna make it red in here if we get an error, and then we have our print string and we have some keys so we don't get spam. Of course you can change all of this. All of the plugins are content only, so you can easily change the blueprints, and I like them to be red when we print so we know this is something we want to change. And then you also have the stack trace, and if you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically going to show you the path to this error. So for example, if you do it in here, it's going to say, okay, on the jump event, something failed, basically. Or yeah, stack trace is going to lead you to there. So let's say when we jump, we have some value. So this can be, I don't know, health or something. Let's say when we are jumping, for some reason, our health needs to be 80, meaning we shouldn't be able to jump if our health is not 80. So we can do something like this, where maybe have a value. Let's do 80 here. I'm gonna put it in here, and you can see how we now get this value. So I can do 80. And traditionally, how you would have to do this is maybe do like a branch. Then you can do health. Is it equal to 80? If it's not equal, let's print, and then we can do all the stuff in here. And maybe you have a sequence in your code, so you do something like this is your normal code, and then you do like a check in here, because you probably don't want like to, maybe you want to connect 2 times into the rest of your code, stuff like that. So this is basically like an easy way, just one node works with any type of input variable. So we're gonna put it in here. Now if I play, we should not get an error, but let's do 70. So we are gonna basically check if the health, which is now 80, is equal to 70. So if I press play and I jump, you can see we get something in the output logs. So let me increase the size of it. So we get something like this: error, state assert failed, 80 is not equal to 70. We can maybe even do this sign. So these are pretty experimental utilities. I haven't polished them too much, so maybe equal in here or not equal would be nice. And you get, just right below that, you get the stack trace. So this can be vague because we are not sure what this 8070 means. So now we get the stack trace and you get way more info in where this actually failed. You go from bottom to up, and it says first person character. So this is where the stack trace starts, and it goes to input action jump. And then it's going to be way easier to find it basically here. Pretty simple. Now you can do stuff like, if I do, let's do set assert, you can do with sets and also with array asserts. Now we don't have the map asserts, and the reason for that is that they were really hard to make. They do not work properly with wildcards, kind of broken, so I haven't created them. But if you really wanted to test assert on a map, and just for people that don't know, map is, let me do this. Map is basically, you can imagine like an array here and an array here. So if you want, you can just do double arrays and then check the keys, check the values, and compare it that way if you want. So you could also use technically asserts with maps if you wanted. But yeah, pretty simple. And honestly, this is the one that I least use, because with games are more dynamic. If I was working on like an application or some, I don't know, banking software or something like that, there's probably going to be way more use for this than any other asserts. But for games, and they're so dynamic, there is not many things that should be at some point something, if that makes sense. There are still some stuff that you can assert, but generally I use them the least. Okay, so let's go to the next assert type, which is design markers. So they're not really asserts, but how they work is basically you put a marker wherever you want, and then you have a tag for that marker, and you can put multiple markers with the same tag, and later you can list out all of the markers. So the general idea is that you have a path of your code, so maybe your code goes like this, and it gets a little bit confusing to what's happening. And maybe, I don't know, point in here, calls the function, and that function has its own path that it does. And this might be like, I don't know, let's do a shoot action. So maybe you shoot, you have to check some stuff, you spawn some particles, maybe the projectile then does something. So there is like a huge path, and it gets really confusing to think about or debug and stuff like that. You're not sure where your code goes. So maybe then you put like a print here, and I don't know, you think maybe it's here, print here, print here. You're trying to see what triggers when, but then maybe it triggers this, but you don't know because you haven't put a print, but you just don't want to have a bunch of prints everywhere, so it gets annoying. So what you would do with markers is basically, let's say we can put like a start marker in here. We can put, generally, you could put it on each like branching point, but you don't have to. There is like more or less critical branching points that you actually want to know. So if something is showing just a widget or something, I don't even know, something that you don't really find important, you don't have to put it. But general idea is you put these markers wherever you want, and then at the end, when everything is resolved, you can also, of course, do like delays or something. But when everything is ending, let's say we do it in here, we have a marker resolve, and it's gonna print you the list of all of the things that happened in order. So it's gonna say, okay, we first triggered this, then we triggered this, then this triggered, and then this triggered. So maybe there is like few markers that you thought were triggering but were not triggering. So now you know which were skipped, which were not skipped, basically. So that's the general idea. So let's actually try to add it to this template. So basically how this template works, just to get a general idea, because this is going to be important when we test stuff out, is you have the character. When character overlaps with a gun, and by the way, this is a first person template that Epic provides you. So I basically didn't touch anything except I deleted the annoying comments. They had like a bunch of comments everywhere. So I just deleted the comments, but this is 100% their code. So we have the first person character. When you overlap with a gun, the gun is going to check if there is another weapon already attached. If there is not, it's gonna spawn a component, and this weapon component, so it spawns this, or adds a component, and this component basically has the input for shooting, and then when you shoot, you spawn a projectile, and stuff happens, and you can see in here how it attaches, how it works. Not the best code, honestly, but for beginners, I think it's fine. So there is like a lot of unhandled cast failed and stuff like that, but for beginner code we're gonna ignore all of that. We're gonna pretend like this is the exact code that we want. And as you can see, there is a bunch of stuff happening in here. So we first have a check in here, then we have the branch in here, but this can also be true here. Maybe we care about that for some reason. Then we go into the component, and this is all just for attaching the gun. So all of this is just for attaching the gun. So maybe we want to check if the gun properly attaches or spawns at all. What we could do is, let's say when the begin overlap starts, so let's do a marker, and this is basically how the marker looks. So I'm gonna connect it here. First I'm gonna do a tag, and let's do gun spawn, or maybe gun pickup is better because it's not spawning a gun. And we can say overlap started. I'm just gonna quickly work through this, but you probably want to be more descriptive, careful, stuff like that. I also added layers in here. I'm not sure how I feel about this addition, because maybe just a tag and marker text is fine. But I like the layers because when you think about how your code goes through and activates stuff, you can imagine like this being a layer 1. Maybe you have like stuff in here. Let's do something like that. You can imagine this layer 2 where the stuff kind of separates. So we can call this like a start layer. We can call this layer 1. Then maybe this is layer 2. We would have something like this for layer 3, and then maybe layer 4 is this. I just like to look at it like that, because then I have a better idea of how deep into my code it went. It gives me maybe a bit better view. I'm still not sure about it if it's necessary, because it's like additional thing that you have to worry about when you're creating markers. One nice thing about it is that it defines start, because how this marker works, it gets a bit complicated, but basically we use a load save game and stuff like that, where we create a save game when we've hit the start one, and then when we get the marker resolve, when we hit this one, and we would also need, it will be like this basically. When we hit this one, it finds the save game and then loads it, stuff like that. So yeah, I think even if I didn't have these layers, I would still have something in here. So I guess it should be fine, because we have to figure out when we want to create a tag. Okay, so we create a marker in here. Let's find another branching point. Let's do it in here. So maybe this. We can do, let's say, layer 1. There's a weapon, something like that. I'm gonna copy paste this. Let's go to weapon component. Or let's put it in here. We can do layer 2. So this is when on picked up, something like that. Let's do something like this. I'm not sure why this would activate, but I misclick this hard. And this can be layer 3, let's say. And maybe when this all is done, so we can do like a sequence. When we are pretty sure that everything is done here, we can do solve. And we need this. Now, another thing in here that of course I have to care about is if it ever goes in here, you can see how it will not actually trigger a marker resolve, because this is ending the whole flow. So we would probably set the marker resolve somewhere in here. For example, what we can do is let's actually move it from here. So I'm gonna move it here and do something like this. I'm not exactly sure if this is gonna work exactly how I wanted it, but let's test it out. So basically when this sequence of things is done, we can then do marker resolve. And let's press play. Now one thing I did is that it's not gonna activate right away. The one thing that we need to do now is run this utility panel, and you can find it in the design markers. So in here, you can run it. And I'm also not sure about this, if I should make it enabled or disabled by default. So we have this marker, which is gun pickup, and we basically need to enable it here. I could make it enabled by default, but I thought it might be nice to just run it once, get it in here, and then you have a list of all your markers, and you can disable, enable, whichever you want to actually be active. And before we go into that, another side note is that all of these asserts have this package for distribution check in the beginning. And the reason for that is that when you package your game, you don't want all of this code to run, you don't want to waste the resources, so basically checks if it's like a production ready thing or not, and then it basically doesn't run the code. So hopefully it just leaves only when you are actually in the editor. So I'm gonna enable this marker gun pickup, and now it should work. So when I pick a weapon, and let's pause and close. Now this is not an error, because we're basically just checking something. It's not something that we need to fix, but I also wanted to make it yellow. So for that I had to make the print have warning, and that basically color codes it yellow. I'm not sure if there is a way for me to custom pick colors. I didn't go into that too much. If there is a way, let me know, but I just put it as a warning just so it's yellow in here, so you can easily pick it up. And it says gun pickup, that this is the tag, and then it says, okay, we started the overlap, we went into layer 2, which is weapon picked up, and that's basically the last one. So we can check then, if you go in here, that it went, let's see, it probably went in here, and weapon picked up. So basically that's the only one that triggered. And the reason for that is that this one only triggers on fail, but if we, let's say, put it in here, now this is still the same flow, I think, not the best place, but you're just gonna showcase it. Let's still do layer 3 for this one. I don't know, let's just make it test 1, 2, 3. Doesn't really matter what we put in here, just focus what happens. I'm gonna press play, go to the gun, and now you can see we see the layer 2 is weapon picked up, and then layer 3 test 1, 2, 3. So convenient, pretty nice. Not the most useful one, I think net assert is more useful for me, but it's still pretty nice, and I can disable it at any point. So when I go and pick it up, you can see it's not printing, not working. That way, when you have 10 markers, you don't have like a spam print in your logs, which can get annoying. You can basically enable, disable, whichever you want. And if you want, you can also delete the save if you want to reset it or you're removing it. So for example, I want to just remove all of these markers. I don't want to then manually have to go into the save folder and delete saves there. You can just press delete save in here. So hopefully makes sense. Now, before we go to the next one, I'm just gonna delete the markers because we are done with them. Okay, let's do this and delete here and all of this. Okay, and now the third one is the one I use the most. I think the other two work fine when you are starting out with Unreal and Blueprints, but the third one I think gets really useful if you become like intermediate or more advanced user, because what it does is basically checks where your code is running when you have a multiplayer game. So the general idea is something like this. Let's say we have begin play here, and I type net assert. So what net assert does, it basically says, where does this event run? We want to enforce that this is running on the server only on the clients, maybe server and the owning clients, authority, or autonomous proxy, stuff like that, or even if it's not replicated. And this way we enforce where our functions and events are triggered. And this gets really useful when you are working on a bit bigger project, because everything gets a bit more confusing when you're working in multiplayer, and you have to make a lot of assumptions, and then your confidence in your code falls. You're hoping that everything works the way you want it, but you're not sure. So with this, you basically get an error if something is not triggering where you want. So let's say server only, we want for this character. So we can basically say, when the game starts, this character event is going to get triggered, and if it's not on the server, if it triggers on the client, we're going to get an error. So let's put something like this, play as a client, and let's press play. And you can see server only track failed. Let's close it up. And because we had two clients, you can see how it failed multiple times. Basically, you can see what's happening. Server only track failed, and it says where it failed. So I really like this system where I have the error and then the stack trace. So hopefully that is also something that you will feel is useful, but this is the general idea. So how would you use this? For example, when we are in here for, let's say, an input, when the player presses something, this net assert is actually pretty useless if you put it in here, because input action can only happen on the client, so this cannot happen on the server. Putting an assert there is not that useful. But begin play can happen on the client and the server, so specifying what you want to happen where is something that you would want to enforce, basically. For example, if you, let's say, want some code to run only on the server, what we could do is check is server, and then we can do a branch and do something like this. And now for this, we really don't need net assert here, because we already know kind of this running on the server because we have this check. So if I press play now, you can see how I get no errors, because now this is running on the server. But let's say you want this begin play to only run on the owning client. So whoever owns this first person character, you want there to run. So I can do owning client only. Let's press play. And we should get 2 errors, I think, yeah. So why we are getting 2 errors is because client 1, when the client 2 joins, the client 2, we get an error because client 1 now got that net assert, it hit that net assert, it activated it. And also when the client 2 spawned and it got information about client 1, it also activated because it knows about begin play of this character. Now to fix this, what we could do is basically do multiple things. So for example, what we can do is get owner, we can do valid. So if it knows who the owner is, it should be owner only. So let's press play. You can see we are now not getting the errors, meaning this only runs on the owner. We can also do stuff like this, custom event, depending on what you're doing, but we can do event that only should run on the, let me call it here. You can have an event that only runs on the owning client. Now this net assert is kind of necessary because this is enforced already to only run on the owning client. So in this specific situation, I wouldn't use net assert here because we already know that it cannot be on anywhere else, basically. Now that we have this custom event that runs only on the owning client, this should basically not give us an error. So if we test, we still get an error, and the reason for that is that this client joins a bit after, so we need a delay here, and we can do something like this. Let's press play, and you can see now we are not getting the errors. So there's like a small thing with multiplayer where this triggers kind of before, so we need a little bit of a delay because it triggers on the server a bit earlier. But you get a general idea of what's happening. So these net asserts are not useful everywhere. If you have events that are like run on server and then you do like server only, this is kind of useless. You don't want to do this. But if you have functions, or not this one, this. If you have function, this is really nice. Net assert, you can do it in here because you can say, this function, I made it to work only on, let's say, clients, not on the server. And if you do this, and let's say somebody in your team a month later tries to use it for something else, he doesn't know where this needs to run. He's gonna get an error, and it's gonna be pretty obvious what is wrong. So then he can try to fix it, change it, leave it, whatever. this increased confidence in my code a lot when I'm working in multiplayer, because when I have this discipline to put these net asserts in whichever functions are possible to run on different client server, stuff like that, and then I run my game and there is no errors, I'm pretty confident that everything is working properly, because my asserts are gonna notify me if I'm doing something that I didn't intend to do, basically relating to running events and functions. The only thing that you need to know is if you have already something that is enforced on a client, on a server, on an owner or authority, stuff like that, you don't need NetAssert. NetAssert is only for stuff that is not already enforced. For example, if you have an object and you're creating it only on the server, you could put an assert on begin play to just check if it's spawned only on the server, because maybe later somebody changes the replication or something, because this event begin play has an ability to do something like that. But you have, for example, any damage, and if you have a retaliate, it says this can only play on the server. So do you really need here the assert? Probably not. Those do not need it, these do not need it, widgets do not need it, because widgets are on the clients only. So there is few things that you don't need, but for everything else, I put a bunch of asserts. So for example, pickup rifle, I don't know, you can check in here if it's running this, let's say, overlap. If it's running only on the server, maybe you don't want the client to even know about this check, so you would do something like this. Here, then we can do server only. Let's press play. Wait, we have few things that I left in here, so I'm just gonna delete this. We can also delete this stuff. So let's press play. And you can see this is triggering also on the client. If I wanted to fix this, then now I know that this triggers on the client. One thing that I might want to do is go to sphere collision. Let's do something like this, no collision. And we can do maybe begin play. And on begin play, maybe we want to do something like this. Let's set generator up events, but we want something like this. Maybe even dedicated server if you want that. Let's do something like that. And only on the server, we're gonna enable the overlap events, and we also need to change the collision. Or actually, let's just change it to whatever it was before. So I think it was custom. So overlap everything in here. So this should be fine. Now this should be on the server, and we should be able to overlap still. So let's try. So now we're not sure if we're actually overlapping. So this system is not created for multiplayer, so I'm kind of trying to hack it, but I'm just gonna try to print in here just to see if we're actually overlapping it or not. Oh yeah, I forgot to change this. So we want query only. And also let's put everything on overlap. So I'm gonna compile a save. Let's press play. And now you can see it only triggers on the server. So pretty nice and convenient, and also it lets you in the future know that this is meant to be on the server, and also your team, whoever is working with you programming, is gonna let them know that this was meant for the server only. So this net assert I actually use a lot in my multiplayer project that I'm working for a client, and it's really useful. It helps me a lot to figure out what needs to be run where, because a lot of leaks can happen when you're not sure exactly and something accidentally runs somewhere where you don't want it to, but you're never gonna get an error, you're never gonna get any notification that it's running until maybe it's too late or you already released the game and now people can easily hack, stuff like that. But with this, you're pretty sure that everything is running where you want it to, so you can enforce like what variables are replicated, how, where, who has access to what. Also not a bad idea to use asserts to check if some values exist on the client. So maybe some value is set on the server to some number, let's say 50, but because it should not be replicated to the client, on the client it should always be 0 or whatever is default value. What you can do is assert on the client and check with the server, see if it's the same value or not the same value. So that way you can enforce also the variable replication, because maybe somebody in the future changes the replication of some variable and didn't know that variable is client only, stuff like that. So a lot of interesting uses. Yeah, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. So we have 3 types of asserts. We have normal asserts, where you just check a value, design markers, where you put different markers through the flow of your code to check stuff, and then net asserts to check and validate where are your functions and events running and enforce it in a way that it's going to give you more confidence while you work. So hopefully you find this useful. Check the description if you want the link to GitHub and try them in your project.